Well, hello everyone. Great to have so many of you joining us today for our online workshop about mapping the ACFID code and DFAT accreditation criteria. It's wonderful to have so many people joining us, and I'm sure we'll have a few more jump on in a minute, but I thought we'd get started. I think we have over 42 different organisations registered this afternoon, so fantastic to have you along. And I believe we also have a couple of DFAT colleagues here with us, which is great as well, so welcome. My name is Emily Morton, and I'm currently the Standards and Code Lead here at ACFID. And this afternoon I'll be joined by two other people helping to present this workshop for you. And that is my colleague Paul Brunton, who's a Standards and Code Advisor and works really closely with me and our colleague Sophie Seck on all things related to the code. And we're also joined by Lisa Partridge, who's an independent consultant who's been working with us to develop this mapping tool, which has been fantastic. And Lisa is also a DFAT assessor, so brings some really interesting and useful insights into how that process operates. And I'm really pleased that she could join us today. She's done a deep dive into all things code and accreditation. So she's going to be running us through in a minute, just some of the different aspects in the actual mapping tool. But I'd like to start our workshop today just by saying Yama from Ngunnawal country here in Canberra. And I'd like to pay my respects to the traditional custodians of this land where I'm coming to you from. And also to all the traditional owners of the lands where we're meeting on today, no matter where you are in Australia or overseas as well. And I'd like to pay my respect to their elders, past, present and emerging, and celebrate the diversity of Aboriginal people as well and their ongoing connection to culture, land and sea. So before I hand over to Lisa and dive into the mapping a bit more, I just wanted to quickly share where we're up to so far. So ACFID has been thinking about this project for a long time. And it's something we hear a lot from members and get a lot of questions about accreditation and what we need to do and how does it match up with the code. So that was kind of our motivation, as well as helping us to understand if there are possible efficiencies that we can find in our own assessment of your code reporting and what we need to think about in terms of going forward in the future with DFAT about finding those areas where we can match or align where possible as well. So we wanted to develop something that was as practical for you as possible, even though it's this crazy Excel spreadsheet. Hopefully it is still user-friendly. That is our aim. So we received some really helpful feedback from some of you on the first draft section, and you'll see we've tried to take that into account as much as possible here. And so again, this is by no means the final product. We're absolutely open to adapting it and improving it as needed. And the final thing to say is that last week we had a really productive conversation with DFAT. We were pleased to meet with some people from the ANCP team, and they're broadly very supportive of the mapping as well. And we're going to be working closely with them to look at endorsing a final piece in November as well. So definitely something that both DFAT and ACFID are keen to finalise and have as a tool on both our websites that's useful for everyone. So that's just a little bit of the background as well. So I'm now going to hand it over to Lisa, and Lisa's going to take us through the first part and just talk us through the mapping a little bit. So over to you, Lisa.
Thanks, Emily. So this tool was a tool that's really been developed for the benefit of all ACFID members, which is why I was so interested in being involved in it and working with ACFID. It identifies the matching compliance requirements of ACFID's Code of Conduct and the DFAT accreditation criteria. There are a lot of requirements under both of these compliance mechanisms, so we really focused on developing a tool that provided a clear map of what NGOs had to comply with, which identified with where there was an overlap, where there are standalone requirements for either the ACFID code or DFAT accreditation, and what the difference between the two actually was. In addition, we really wanted to make the tool have a practical element, as Emily spoke to. So we wanted to be able to complement a practical component to the mapping information that you were being provided. So we aim for this practical element of the tool to be internally adjusted to suit each of your organisation's needs, and I'll talk you through how you can do that. Hopefully this tool will reduce the burden for organisations when you're preparing for accreditation, or at least give you a starting point of what you might already have in place by being compliant with the code. So what I'm going to talk through now is the structure of the tool, because when you first open it, it can be a bit overwhelming, and then give you some pointers for use. So when you open up the tool, you can see that there's a number of tabs along the very large Excel spreadsheet that it is. It starts with intro and instructions, which is obviously where I'd encourage everyone to start. This tab provides clear instruction on the information on the purpose and use of each of the tabs. The next tab is titled Mapping Overview. This is really the high-level overview and is for oversight and planning. It's just an information tool for you, and it identifies the intersection between ACFID's Code of Conduct commitments, which are listed down the vertical column on the left side with the mustard and blue colours, and the DFAT accreditation criteria and indicators, which are horizontal across the top in grey. Where there are matching compliance requirements, these are shown in a traffic light scale of colours. So we've put dark green to indicate there's a direct match between the two, and then it progressively gets lighter through the scale to light green, yellow, orange, and then red. So the red is where there's no matching compliance requirements at all, and these ones circled here that you can see are the standalone ones for the ACFID for that section. And all of these plotted colourful squares in the tab showing the alignment are drawn directly from the mapping that's been done in these more detailed tabs that I'm going to talk to further along. So you don't need to make any edits to this tab, it's really just for your information as an overview. Before moving on, I'm also keen to point out that all of this mapping can be filtered based on whether you're looking at going for full or base level DFAT accreditation. And this can be done primarily by clicking the plus and minus tabs. On this mapping overview tab, the plus signs along the top just need to be clicked, and then that shows you the bolded full level accreditation indicators, or you hit the minus ones and it removes all the full levels, and that's just the base level indicators. So that's the overview. The next tab we've got in the tool is the planning dashboard. This is a practical tool that's been developed for your internal use as an NGO. So while the mapping overview tab that we just looked at shows the alignment between ACFID and DFAT, this tab is to help internally track your progress against each criteria as you're planning for your organisation's accreditation. I really see this tab as being useful for the person who's coordinating accreditation, or for your management team to have visibility on point-in-time progress. It may also help with internal organisational planning by identifying your own gaps or problem areas and where you can allocate resources as you work towards accreditation. So on this tab, you can allocate and type in who's responsible within your organisation for each criteria. So once someone's name's against it, often it has to be done. And that can be done in that column. I've put some blue names as an example. And then the colours that are included here for each accreditation indicator are automatically filled in based on what you put in the next detailed tab. So you don't need to touch those, that will all automatically generate to provide you a real dashboard to see where you're at as an organisation in your preparation. Again, across all tabs, all the bold criterion are the full level DFAT accredited, full level accreditation indicators. The next 5 tabs in the tool have detailed mapping on each of the DFAT criterion. So you'll see here there's DFAT criterion A, B, C, D, and E. For each of these, they're all structured the same with 3 horizontal groups of information. The first 2 horizontal groups I'll show you are for your information, and then the third section of these tabs is a practical tool that you can use. So I'll show you in my sample the DFAT Criterion A, but they're all structured the same. So this is the first of the 3 sections within the DFAT Criterion tabs. This just looks at DFAT accreditation requirements. It identifies all the criteria and indicators that you as an NGO need to meet to become DFAT accredited. And then it lists what you need to provide when you're submitting your agency profile to DFAT. So we've listed all the questions that require a narrative response, and then the attachments that you have to provide to DFAT. And then in this section, there's also a hyperlink that goes to DFAT's accreditation guidance manual that has all the details for each of those indicators. The next horizontal group within the DFAT Criterion tabs then looks at the ACFID code. So we've looked at the DFAT, now we're looking at ACFID. And this again is just a piece of information for you. This really looks at where the ACFID code of conduct aligns with each of those DFAT indicators. So identifies which verifiers within the code align to that identified indicator, and then links to the good practice toolkit that takes you to those verifiers to give you more information on how you comply. The next part of this section is how close those compliance requirements match. So this is really the mapping tool, and we've plotted that against a traffic light system that you saw in that overview earlier. Where they don't match, we've got a gap analysis narrative that talks to what the difference is between DFAT and ACFID. And we've also added some extra considerations for you to keep in mind when you're looking at this indicator. So the purpose of this is really to show you where there's a match between ACFID and DFAT, and then identify how closely those indicators align with the coloured tab, and then where there's not an alignment, what it is and how you can bridge that gap if you're going from being code compliant to looking at getting DFAT accreditation. The last section within each of these Criterion tabs is a practical tool that matches all that information that you've just been given. So it's given a space for allocating responsibilities, planning your timeframes. There's a drop-down traffic light system for your own use, so you can self-identify where you as an organisation feel that you're aligning with the indicator at that point in time, and then adjust that as your planning moves forward towards accreditation. And there's also spaces for you to note your own internal gap analysis and a place to list all the evidence that you're compiling for accreditation, so that's all in one place. For this section, you can play around with it. For example, you can change the titles or add extra columns to suit your own organisation's needs, so please don't feel tied to what we've put here. For example, the responsibilities I've got here are lead and support person. You can change this to a Reiki allocation of responsibilities or whatever works for your organisation. The current status traffic light system automatically informs your planning dashboard that we saw previously. And the drop-down wording within those can be changed to match your organisation's internal planning and approvals process. So at the moment we've got finalising, planning, drafting, but you might have an approvals process that you want to include by saying we've got it drafted, then it's approved by Joe Bloggs, and then it goes on to being finalised and approved by the board, or whatever your internal process is. So that's it for the DFAT Criterion tabs. And the last tab within the tool is the ACFID code commitments. This lists all the code commitments and verifiers, along with hyperlinks to ACFID's good practice toolkit. It includes a drop-down around compliance and also space where you can put your written response for your code self-assessment. This tab could be useful to reference your code reporting when you're preparing for accreditation, or used as an example, as an extra planning tool when you're planning your ACFID code reporting. So that's a very brief summary of a very big tool. I'm going to now jump around the tool a little bit and show you some features that will hopefully be useful when you're using it. So as mentioned, you can filter all of this tool based around whether you're going for full accreditation or base level accreditation. And that's done by hitting the tabs along the side. So when I've shown you in the overmapping how to do that, but then in the DFAT Criterion tabs, the plus and minus buttons that we saw earlier are down the far left-hand grey column. And if you're going for full accreditation, make sure you've hit the plus button all the way down for each of the criteria. And this will unhide the full level indicators that are in the bold font. If you're going for base level, just hit minus and it'll hide all those bold font full level indicators. So you're just looking at the base level. But just remember that this needs to be done for each of the criterion tabs. So you want to make sure that if you're going for full, you're looking at all the full indicators there. My next tip is that you can protect or unprotect the sheets. So we've set the tool up in a way that all the interactive and planning aspects are functional when the sheets are still protected. So you can type in, select the drop-down boxes, make changes, add columns, while the mapping element, all the information that we've put in there for you remains protected. But if you need to make changes beyond the scope that we've allowed for in there, you can right-click on the tab you want to change, right-click on the tab button, click Unprotect Sheet, make your changes, and then you go back and right-click again to protect the sheet again, so all that content stays set. You can also change, as I mentioned, your own internal drop-down planning list. So where you're tracking your point in time progress against each DFAT indicator, the wording can change and be personalised to match your own organisation's planning and approval process. To be able to do this, go into the Intro and Instructions tab, and you can scroll down and you'll see that there's a master drop-down list. You can change the narrative for each of these drop-down windows or boxes. And once that's done and you go back into the DFAT Criterion list and start making your own selections, your narrative changes from the master list will be reflected in your drop-down boxes within the DFAT Criterion tabs. It's a very big tool. So if it at any point is becoming a little overwhelming, you can hide stuff that you don't need at that point in time, or share it within your organisation and hide what wider people don't need to see. There's a lot of information there, and I ended up accidentally clicking links and doing things that I probably shouldn't have been doing when I was working in there. So if you're finding that, you can select individual columns to hide, or select entire sections of the tabs and hide that by selecting those columns, right-clicking, selecting hide, and likewise to unhide, right-click and unhide. So those are my tips for how to use. It's a very quick run through. We also wanted to talk about the level of match. So how we determined the match between DFAT and ACFID compliance requirements. Each of the DFAT accreditation indicators were compared against the ACFID Code of Conduct commitments down to the verifier level. Where there was direct alignment, these were marked with a really dark green match. However, if we found that there was any possibility of a slight misalignment, even around the wording that was used, that we weren't entirely confident that there was a direct match, it wasn't given that dark green colour as a direct match. So we always erred on the side of caution to make sure we didn't give you a false sense of security and that there was alignment there. So we were quite harsh in how we made the matches, and any variation we noted in the gap analysis narrative that we've got there for you. The challenge around this was really that there's really strong overlapping elements between all the work we do with partners and when we design projects and how we consider and integrate cross-cutting issues. So rather than dilute the process by including every possible tenuous link to each indicator, we identified the best and most direct matches between each DFAT indicator and the ACFID verifiers. And then when there was more tenuous links, these were included in the other considerations column. This was done consistently so that the tool was focused enough to be useful, but also included all the other notes to inform you when you're planning and making considerations when you're going for DFAT accreditation. Where ACFID had additional requirements beyond DFAT compliance, these were noted in purple text in the gap narrative, just so you knew where in some aspects you might be exceeding DFAT requirements. Lastly, a few important points from me. I really hope that this tool helps you with your internal planning. Please refer back to the hyperlinked DFAT and ACFID guidance, manual and toolkits that have been linked in there for all their detailed information. Despite how overwhelming it is when you first look at it, we've tried to minimise the level of narrative and referred back to the tools of ACFID and DFAT wherever possible. The matches are based on the guidelines and tools for ACFID and DFAT. So you can't assume that a green match of the requirements means that you will automatically comply. You need to be sure that your organisation is compliant with the ACFID code verifiers and then the DFAT requirements, and then have the evidence to back it up and demonstrate it when you go through accreditation. So it's a very big tool. I look forward to hearing back as we go to the breakout groups to discuss it further. But I recognise that compliance is a really massive task. So I hope that the tool is useful to you as individual organisations and also to the sector more broadly.